We were kind of talking a minute ago that we could start with the prompt. We had started with,
How's it going, Ice?
hey, how's it going, Grim? We were talking about, starting with the prompt of, is Trump a traitor, and talking about this whole Russia situation. But we could just keep talking about shit transplants too, if y'all want.
I'm still maintaining my theory that Trump is a time traveler. He's using Tesla technology, an interdimensional war with the future Hillary empire, and there's evidence for that. There's strong evidence.
Okay.
This is going to be an... Oh, so yes, I also want to make sure everybody knows that we might be posting this on YouTube, so that YouTube will get to see how weird the internet can be. And you just made my point right there with the time traveler Trump thing and the ship transplants.
Wait, so I'm curious.
Actually, they're actually directly related.
I'm curious though. So I'll entertain that. What's the evidence that Trump is a time traveler?
Sorry, I pushed you to talk. I believe Trump's uncle ended up taking care of Tesla's notes after Tesla's untimely and very suspicious death.
I think his hair is a good indication that he's not from this world.
And having access to future technology, he's actually has the capability of sending radioactive beams from his eyeballs. And in the debates, this is what he was using to make Hillary so ill in the final stages of the election, when she was, suffering from micro seizures and such. That was actually as a direct result of, radio beams, radio waves beyond the visible spectrum shooting from Trump's eyes and attacking her.
He hides a shiv underneath his shank, okay, under his hair.
Yeah.
No, but is this wall actually being built? Is the wall going to happen? Not being an American, I don't really know much about it.
I could see him pushing that because it was something he ran on for the president. When he was running, and it was one of his things that he fucking went around saying. He's going to build this fucking wall. He was going to build jobs for Americans. Like we want that kind of fucking job of constructing a wall that is larger than the fucking Great Wall of China, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's just, if he's actually a time traveler, he has very little foresight, I mean, to me, I watch this dude interacting, and it seems like every move he makes is just like, what is the crowd going to respond to in the immediate, without much thought about like what the later ramifications are going to be. So that alone is like evidence against the time travel thing for me.
So why deposit that Trump could potentially be a traitor? What makes you ask that?
Well, that was I mean, that came up as a topic just because it's like being discussed a lot. I mean, there's all these accusations flying around against him.
What are these accusations based on?
Well, so the accusation that he's colluding with Russia, and that like the Russians colluded to affect our election, and whether he's given sensitive information to a foreign government that might be hostile.
I mean, from my understanding of what was going on during the election, I think the inverse is true. I believe that if there was any election tampering occurring, it was happening from the Hillary side of things.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's a lot of evidence that tampering was happening on the Hillary side, but like now, like the whole media is just like screaming about it. The Russia thing is just like in the news constantly, and they're pushing this narrative so hard that like, the Russians were involved in the election.
Well, I
agree, and I mean,
answer to that question's relatively self-evident.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, what kind of? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, dude.
I'm just curious. What kind of information is he is he accused of giving? And how did they come to that conclusion that he gave any evidence without some sort of monitoring of him in general?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing.
He was being illegally monitored, yes.
So I mean, like talking. So this is interesting. Like coming in here and then talking to my parents, who are very like digesting the mainstream news, and talking to them about it, I got the impression that there's kind of like multiple aspects of it. One aspect being, they're saying that the Russians tampered with our election to get Trump elected and not Hillary. That's one level. And then there's another aspect of like this accusation that the Russian government has like hired armies of internet trolls to like sway public discourse in the United States, and that like all this like anti-Hillary sentiment is like just created by Russian trolls. I mean, I don't believe that. That's the narrative that's being pushed, though.
I mean, again, I believe the inverse is true. I think it's clear that the Hillary campaign was employing thousands of people online to try and sway discussion on a whole bunch of platforms, like Reddit, and also the Chans, if you guys are familiar with Infinity Chan, or obviously Big Bad 4chan.
Yeah. I mean, it's clear to me personally that Hillary has a lot more to do with. Hang on. You can't hear me? Okay. I think that Hillary has a lot more to do with tampering with evidence and collusion and, dirty tricks. And I think that if the best that they can do right now is getting an email from Donald Trump Jr. saying that, he would like to maybe get some information, some incriminating information from an old family friend, from somebody that they knew from years previous. If that's the only evidence of collusion, then what else is there, really? They would be on it like white on rice if they had more than that.
I mean, I think it's all a red herring to distract from some of the more damaging leaks that have occurred, like the Podesta leaks, and all of the emails that have led to the Pizzagate investigation that's going on at the moment. I don't know if it's lost steam. I haven't been on top of Pizzagate in the last couple of months. I kind of lost interest in it. But have you guys taken a look at the Pizzagate situation and what happened with that?
Yeah, and I think that's funny. The irony is that the accusation about Russia hacking our election, the other facet of it that I forgot to mention, is they're saying that Podesta's emails got leaked because the Russians infiltrated the DNC. So, the irony is like all this information about Podesta got exposed, and they said they tried to just like deflect it away and say, oh, it's the Russians doing this. And then, after the Pizzagate stuff happened, like Podesta himself, he was silent for like 3 months. He didn't make any kind of statement. Like thousands of people are accusing him of being a pedophile and a sex trafficker, and he didn't respond at all. And then the first thing he did publicly was he wrote an op-ed for Washington Post talking about the great failure of the FBI in preventing the Russians from hacking our election. So yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
It's an exercise in iconoclasm.
Sorry, Wotan.
Sorry, no, go ahead. My bad.
I think they're complicit, and that this may have been planned prior to the election, in so much as neither campaign outsmarted the other when it comes to saying the Russians are going to release this information, the WikiLeaks situation, the Russians involved in the election. I think they used that together in tandem to affect the outcome of the election, and that both parties, both campaigns were complicit, and that it was planned all along.
That's an interesting.
I think it's just politics as usual. We're reading too much into it. I see it as more of an attack from the media, which is typically left wing. I mean, you got Fox News, but they're arguably against the president as well. It's the media in general, and who's behind the media corporations.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, softly, is like, I think that's a possibility, but the thing that makes me kind of lean away from that is, like, seeing the way the media reacts to certain things. Like, you can kind of see, like, the agenda behind certain behaviors. Like, in certain arenas, like, we have this left and right dichotomy where there's, like, different facets that seem to be arguing with each other, like, over abortion and gay rights and that kind of stuff. But then when it comes to certain things that there's, like, this corporate agenda behind it, like, say the TPP or like, you know, like genetically modified foods. It's like the media is pretty unified about those things or silent about those things. And just the fact that the media has like really like ravaged against Trump and, you know, come out against him so strongly, that makes me think that was like a mistake, that was not part of the, you know, the unified agenda that's going on. But I don't know. I mean, you could be right.
See, the media doing what they did, to me, makes it more obvious that when they have their pulse on the way the American populace feels, which is a disenchantment with government, they're disenfranchised with all of these corrupt machinations, which are becoming more and more obvious by the day, that the media, in order to create a candidate who will so-called drain the swamp, who will be for the people and against the political corruption, the best way to do that, to manipulate the masses, is to attack that candidate and attack them specifically for not playing ball, being different than politicians. It's very, very suspect to me the way that they had a female candidate and a misogynist run at the same time, essentially. Because to me, that's a form of manipulation at a very higher, more scalar level. And I think to create a candidate who seems to be for the people, if they wanted that, then they would have given Ron Paul a good run instead of completely negating him and his campaign and brushing him under the rug. They intentionally attacked Trump. They created this hype surrounding Trump because they wanted to tap into that disgruntled American feeling to get him elected. And I do think that the whole Russian connection was just part of that, to make people distrust Hillary, and that they were both complicit, that was the plan all along.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, this is all bread and circus, meant to distract us from the truly pertinent issues. I mean, the election really truly has no bearing on it is not a critical issue for the people living in America at the moment.
Yeah, I agree, but I think it is important to discuss, to examine like the elements at play, because I mean, I definitely agree that there's a coherent agenda at place, and you might be totally right about everything you said, that Trump is part of that agenda, and it makes sense. Like what you were saying just makes sense. But I think also another thing to take into account is like even within, like there's groups nested within groups, so like even within an institution like the CIA or the NSA or any kind of government body, it's like there may be people within that group who are, care about the American people and want to do something for the purpose of integrity and not for their own gain and not for this agenda going on. So I don't know. I mean, certain things, like it seems like there's people pulling the strings behind it, but I think it's also important to remember, that it's really hard to get a whole group of people to be complicit in something of that kind of scale. And I don't know. It's just like, I think that to me, it seems like it might be just like giving them a little bit too much credit, that maybe they've taken that stance now that Trump is elected, that they're going to use it however they will. But my personal feeling, and this is just an opinion, is that, they didn't plan for him to win.
I would just like to bring up this clip of Obama that has been going around a lot lately. It basically says, "Mr. Trump, stop whining." And he literally says there's no serious person that actually believes that a single country would be able to have a noticeable effect on our election. And now, when, the tide turns the wrong way, look where we are. It's the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, I think that gets to kind of like what I was thinking too, is if Hillary had won, the whole agenda, the story going up into the election, assuming that Hillary was going to win, was we have a democratic process and we have to stick by the democratic process, and even if you're not happy, Trump's got to just accept it, like if Hillary wins, because we got to uphold our American values. And now that Trump has won, the whole media is not just attacking him, but attacking the integrity of our election process, and that is going to a deeper level. And the fact that they're attacking whether the election was fair or not, that to me, that kind of cuts to a level of desperation,
Well, I think the American people had a right to see that side, though. You know, they saw it play out. They saw the DNC leaks. They started connecting the dots and seeing that, you know, Clinton was their candidate from day one. There was no competition. You know, they started seeing through the veil, like of these two puppets that are thrown up in front of us. You know, we have to choose from every 4 years. But these people aren't cut from the same cloth as everybody else in America.
Yeah, definitely, and that's what makes me think that it's kind of that it's a pivot. That the attack on Trump is a pivot from the original plan and not part of the agenda from the beginning. But I mean, I guess it's kind of neither here nor there, you know.
I mean, it is kind of here or there. I mean, I feel like we have it's almost like we have a midget on a bucking bronco, and like that's what I feel like Trump is. He is just completely out of control, and no one can, help him be more in control. That's how I feel about him.
Right. The plane is going down, and a wombat is flying the plane. And people, instead of saying, fuck, we've got to have something better than a wombat flying the plane, people are like, give him a chance. Let's see how this wombat can do. The plane is going down.
I mean, how's he going so far, though? How do you guys think of how Trump's performed as president so far and the decisions that he's made?
Because he's the best salesman ever, and one of the best products that he's ever sold is his damn self. The Trump name.
No, I mean, how do you feel about the changes that he's put in place and the actions that he's taken so far?
I mean, I think in one level, like I really feel like the cabinet he's created are morons. They're really like incredibly unqualified people. I mean, just looking at Betsy Davos's like what her hearing or whatever it's called, where she was getting approved by the Senate. Like some of the answers she gave to those questions, it's not even like she's got a negative agenda, but she's like totally ignorant of central questions that are like hugely important to education. So, but I mean, in terms of other areas, like I feel like he did stop the TPP from going through, and he may be stopping certain things that are like that on a bigger level, but I don't know.
The thing that I do like about Trump is that everybody is critical of him, and everybody is questioning our president for the first time. I feel like, what he's doing is probably not that much worse than what Obama did, but no one cared because Obama was really slick. He was able to carry himself off in a certain way that, Democrats would always take his side and say, oh, I'm sure he knew what he was doing. I'm sure he had, the right kind of advice or whatever. And I feel like just like the left were making excuses for Obama, now the right is making excuses for Trump. And I just don't understand how those people think that they're not brainwashed and everyone else is.
Well, I mean, he appointed Jeff Sessions as his attorney general. Right? And he himself said that he was going to leave it up to the states, for instance, to determine their own regulations for marijuana. Okay? And yet Jeff Sessions, the individual he appointed, has openly said that he thinks that it should be prosecuted, that he obviously doesn't want to leave it up to the states, that he wants to get rid of it in every fashion or form. So here you're appointing someone who goes directly against the planned protocol that you have in place to carry out these so-called liberties and freedoms that should be a matter of states' rights. When you have a president or an attorney general or one of these appointed cabinet members who is opposed to states' rights, that's a problem because what you're doing is you're inviting more of the nanny state, big brother government into play, and you can't speak out both sides of your mouth. You need to have some dynamism where what you do is what you say you're going to do, and those things need to meet up. If you say one thing and yet do another, then everyone begins to question that, whether you're disingenuous about all of it to begin with, whether it was a bait and switch sales pitch, and I think it was.
I mean, that's consistent with Trump's methods. He's always done the bait and switch. He always says, I have everything, I have the plan, everything's in order. And then, he goes to other people and says the same thing. And then it all kind of collapses underneath him. I mean, I think that's happened many times in his career.
Yeah, I personally, I think the upshot of that I see, is like people really desperately wanted something different from the establishment politics that we've been getting for everyone's, every living person's memory. And Trump came in and, he was like, I'm outside of the establishment. I'm my own self-made man. And now we're getting the same thing again anyway, And so what I see as the benefit of that is it's kind of pulling the veil off, And I think personally, I feel like the like ultimate direction that we have to go in as a society, as a global society, is like relinquishing this idea that we need a government to dictate what we're doing. And because like now we're at a state with technology that individual people and small communities like have the power to provide everything they need for themselves, but we've built this infrastructure where everyone's dependent on a grid for everything, in terms of like energy and power, but also in terms of like our decision making. We're dependent on this massive like federal government grid to create what the rules are going to be, and we don't need that. Like, at a fundamental level, we don't need that. And my hope is that Trump is kind of like a first step in like getting people to realize that we can't depend on the government to make decisions for us.
Right. It might take this guy to get people actually interested in what goes on in their government to finally realize, holy shit, I mean, it's been a clusterfuck this whole time. And I think that people have this illusion of safety, that there's people handling it, that there's people taking care of the problems. And it's getting to the point now where people are getting this sense of responsibility and feeling like they need to do something. For that, I'm very, very happy that Trump is president. Maybe he is a little bit of a shooting target, and I do think that the media treats him unfairly in many cases, especially with this Russia hacking thing. At the same time, I mean, I cannot stand behind him and say he's a great fucking president. I just can't.
After the fiasco of 9/11, it makes it very difficult for me to give the media any credence whatsoever, the mainstream media. And when it comes to the CIA green screening events to manipulate people, like on YouTube, for instance, and when it comes to all of these concerted efforts to feed the alternative news sites and to create false news stories simply to affect public opinion, it becomes very easy for me to dismiss outright the obvious, what seems to be obvious motivations of the news media, because I think that their motivations are nothing obvious whatsoever. I think that's what people are meant to believe about it. I don't think that the media, bash Trump as a means to try to protect the American people from electing a bad president. I think they bashed Trump so that the American people would elect someone out of their distrust for media and distrust for corruption.
Yeah, and for that reason, I think that maybe the fact that Trump is president is a very good thing. I may not like him. I may not like the way he talks. I may not like the way he walks. I may not like the implications that some of his policies have on people and the way that it portrays his character. It's like I can see through him, you know what I mean? And I just get a bad feeling. I think there's more to him that people don't realize, and I think that he's more interested in power and wealth than the little guys. I think he's a billionaire president. He's not, the people's president.
I see an agenda. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I see an agenda that goes so far back, and maybe I've just spent too many years as a conspiracy theorist, right? Where we went from Clinton and this far left kind of situation to Bush, which was a far right situation, a potentially stolen election. There was a lot of hype around that and controversy. But then we wound up with Obama, and again, we went to the other end of the ideological hegemony, back to the left. And the whole race thing comes into play. It seems to me to be like a decade at least, over a decade's worth of, this Hegelian dialect that moves people from the left and then to the far right and then from the left to the far right, while the ideas themselves become closer and closer over time. The parties begin to look very similar over time. And there's a reason for that, because it gets people to reject a certain extreme of ideology. And yet the next minute, 4 years later, they're rejecting at the opposite extreme. And so, in my opinion, and this is probably a little far-fetched, I think that the plan to get someone like Trump elected was in place before the Clintons, and that those presidencies over time were meant to manipulate the American psyche to such an extent that they would accept someone who was a fucking reality TV star, who would be this president for the people, not a lifelong politician, not a, promising to drain the swamp. And of course the media is going to come out and attack a candidate like that, because they understand the flow of the American mentality and psychology after 15, 16 years of dealing with this left and right paradigm, where everyone eventually gets funneled through these chutes like cattle that are fences on the left and right. And as the ideological hegemony gets closer and closer, where both parties are essentially the same, it makes for a time where you can put up a candidate who, the Republicans reject, who the Democrats reject. But he's something that I think has been planned for a long time coming.
But then what do you make of the fact, like, of those polls? I feel like, I don't know, part of me feels like it must have been a mistake or a fluke or something, or they didn't anticipate, so many people to come out. If they were so sure about it in the polls, why would they discredit themselves by releasing such fake information if they knew that he was going to be president? Because it's of my opinion that the media, had a lot of collusion going on with both candidates, right?
Well, if you think about it, the polls, statistics, what they reveal is not, they're like bikinis. What they reveal is not so important as what they don't reveal, right? And with statistics, if they want Trump to be elected, they're going to come out with these really close poll numbers that indicate Hillary to be winning, so that Trump voters have the impetus to come out in full force and go ahead and get them elected. This is another reason why I believe that both parties were complicit.
But I mean, but the polls right before the election were saying that she had like a 95% chance of winning. Like when I looked at the polls, it was all like, oh, it's in the bag, for Hillary. And our friend was just saying the other day, he was looking at a video of Trump during the moment of him winning, and like he was told by all of his advisors, like in the week leading up, that there was no chance. And I think this video of him like seeing the TV, like when it became clear that he had won, that he's just like nobody's cheering, he's just like shocked, And I think him and his pundits were like equally shocked as Hillary was, And I don't know, it makes me think that they've just like pivoted their strategy.
I think that's just good acting, quite frankly. I think that's the sideshow charade that we're meant to see, when behind the curtains different things were going on. But that's just my opinion. I'm a little extreme. I'm a little radical.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing that I kind of look into when thinking about this is like just looking at the history of it, the history of like the New World Order or whatever you want to call it. Like, looking at this, like Adam Weishaupt, who is the founder of the original Illuminati, which may not even exist in that form today, but, he wrote out all this agenda for like basically like taking over the world. And, it had all these specific plans laid out to like, remove like possession of arms from individuals, remove all private property, control the media, control the state in all these different ways through infiltration. He had all the strategies like written out in a text. And, it got confiscated by the police, and, miraculously, through a miraculous turn of events, like, we can actually look at that book and see all the things he laid out. And, he laid out this plan that wasn't going to come to fruition until, like, way after he died, And I think that something about, like, looking at this group of people, and there is a lot of evidence, that there is a group of people who are, like, pushing forward this certain kind of, like, world domination agenda, is that they're extremely patient. and they change they adapt, like they're like watching. That's why they spy so intensely, through the NSA and all that, is because they're taking a thermometer of what's going on in the culture constantly, and constantly readjusting what their strategy is with extreme patience, towards getting what their goal is. And I think, like, there's this talk of this guy talking, I forget the guy's name, I wish I could remember his name, but this guy talking about all of this in like 1967. And he said in 1967 that, there was part of this agenda to spark World War III, between a cultural conflict between the Middle East and the West, and that was 50 years ago. And they're still trying to do it, and they're pushing it forward at whatever pace they can. But I think something that they go by is, if the public becomes too aware of what they're doing, or if there's too much of an outcry against something they're trying to push through, they won't force it, And what I see Trump as is he's like a hang-up in their plan, and they've pivoted towards a different approach now that he got elected. But I mean, that's just my opinion too.
I think you make a good point about these long-term plans that take effect over time, and that they, have a litmus test to gauge any kind of adaptations to the plan that need to be made over time. I completely agree. I think it will be interesting, in fact, to look at that plan, look at the structure of that plan and the structure of those means of carrying it out, and make a side-by-side comparison in the run-up to the election recently, and to kind of parse out where each machination of the media or the campaigns themselves kind of represent and lay in with the particular strategy at play, point by point. That would be interesting to see a side-by-side comparison.
I think it's kind of obvious, I guess, if you take yourself out of the matrix. If you just take yourself away from the media, if you watch the news every day, take yourself away for like a week, and then reapproach it. And if you look at it, you'll begin to see a narrative, if you open your eyes wide enough, I guess, of the anti-Trump. Everything is negative, all the headlines, right? And so they feed your head with this narrative, Trump of being the worst president ever. He's a traitor to the country, this and that. But none of that stuff is founded. They're not charging the man with anything. Maybe it's too early in the game, but it doesn't seem like there's any validity to any of the accusations, yet they continue to make them openly within the mainstream media.
I may not believe that he actually colluded with Russia to, influence the election, but I do believe that he has no tact. He has no, he's not suave, he's not slick. He's tweeting 18 times a day. I mean, he's low-hanging fruit, and it's easy. He's an easy guy to hate. You have to at least acknowledge that. I mean, most people aren't going to really look into his background and, figure out reasons why to dislike him. They'll just dislike him. But, that may be true. But at the same time, that doesn't mean he's a great guy, because people are making up stuff about him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's more of a testament to how hated Hillary is. Like our friend was talking the other day about the lead up to her campaign, and she had to answer this question of like, why do you want to be president? And she was like, the insiders in her campaign were saying that she kind of saw this as like this inconvenient annoyance that she had to come up with, and she had all her entire team like trying to come up with like, what is the reason, like, why do you want to be president? And like what one of the things they come up with is, it's her turn. Like that's like their best answer. It's her turn. I mean, I think it's just like, she's so hateable. And I think it's like it's almost as much a testament to how much people just don't like her that Trump got elected.
I mean, it's highly suspect, some of these Russian officials that have very high-ranking Russian officials, ambassadors to the UN, consuls and so forth here in the United States. On the day of the election, there was a Russian consular who was, first it was reported by the Russians themselves that he fell to his death from the roof. And then it was said that he had a heart attack. And then when the police report came about it, it was said that he must have had a tumor and there was insane bleeding within his chest cavity, and that he was in poor health. And this is the day of the election, and this particular individual was very involved with the Russian media, for instance. there have been 8 deaths of prominent Russian ambassadors and diplomats over the last 8 months since the election. And that also is highly suspect to me, because one of the main reasons to shut someone up is because they obviously have something to hide. And all of these individuals were very highly connected and particularly involved with the media, whether it be the Russian state media or involved here in some of our political meanderings with Russia. So that also is very suspect to me.
Right. But then also you have, on the Hillary side, you have all these deaths that are linked to the DNC and people that are investigating and, suing on the behalf of, Bernie Sanders supporters and everybody else in the Democratic Party that thought that they were having a fair primary. So it's weird to me that there's, collusion on the Russian side, there's collusion on the DNC side, and, maybe, but do you have any, links from those deaths to Trump specifically?
I mean, the point in eliminating people is so that those links can't be exposed. That's why you eliminate them. So the notion that just because we don't have those links, I mean, it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's self-evident, but the point is to prevent those links from being exposed. So it's still very suspect to me. I'll show you a link to a CNN report that they did about these 8 particular deaths. And if reading through that information, it's very peculiar. Some of the individuals died on the same day. One of them, their wife found, that was a high-ranking senior diplomat for Russia, that they found this individual in their bedroom with a pillow over their head, and when the wife pulled the pillow off of their head, they had a head wound, obviously. And this happening on the same day that another high-ranking Russian official was gunned down in the middle of the street. And I think we'll all remember the incident where that Turkish guy in the middle of an art expo or something murdered yet another high-ranking senior Russian official and diplomat. And you see the guy laying on the ground, and you see the gunman standing next to him. All these people are hunkered down, kind of avoiding getting shot, but there's absolutely not one speck of blood, not on his clothing, not on the floor, not anywhere. And it's very suspicious to me, all of these untimely deaths that have all been ruled as, no foul play whatsoever. And I'll show you that link here.
I mean, I kind of, I'm going to agree with Alpha on this one. I guess I'm not going to fully agree because I'm not sure, obviously, but those people could have just been critical of Putin, and I'm not going to sit here and say Putin is like a fucking angel. I know the Russian government is really fucked up. So, but the problem is that I have with this is that the United States government is arguably almost even more fucked up in some ways. It's just that CNN and other news media are going to report on all this stuff and bring it over here and create this kind of mass hysteria along with the Trump narrative to kind of paint this picture. And I feel like CNN has been disingenuous with the Russia narrative. So, the fact that it came from CNN makes me a little suspicious. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not going to discount it. I think there is a possibility, but it's just a kind of a gut feeling, and along with some details.
What's interesting is that the way that CNN spun the report is such that you would think that this only has to do with people who are against Putin. And the way they spun the report is kind of a deflection away from the fact that it should be suspicious, because these particular high-ranking individuals were, working in close ties with the United States, with the UN, with other countries. So they weren't just involved in terms of Russia. They were diplomats for these other nation states and for the U.S., et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting to me the way CNN spun it, because they want it to look like they were only complicit and maybe had an issue with the Russian government. That's how they're looking at it. Let's just consider this as an issue with Putin, and it's an internal issue to do with the state of Russia, when these particular diplomats had so many ties to all of these other countries and nation states.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. Like, going back to like the people I know who pretty much accept the mainstream narratives and trust CNN, trust the New York Times. They have, it's like common knowledge among people who follow those kinds of narratives that journalists get murdered in Russia. It's like kind of an accepted fact. Like, oh, Putin is like murdering people, but then without examining like where it could be happening in the U.S. or where there's like other parties involved besides these like evil communists who may be murdering people. And my cousin the other week was talking, and he's like, yeah, there's these crazy people who like they actually believe that Hillary Clinton might kill people or like kills people, in order to silence things. And I was just thinking, well, like, why is that so ludicrous to believe? And I would something I haven't done research on that I would like to know more about is like seeing a list. I would love to see like sort of a compilation of like journalists who have died. I don't know if anybody has access to something like that.
Well, the way that the media handles it in general is to go ahead and address the issue because people are talking about it. So they'll go ahead and address these deaths, right? But they'll spin it in such a way, they'll pivot and spin it in such a way that we can just classify them a certain way, right? And they've done this before in so many respects where they'll take an issue, like, for instance, the whole presidential bloodline connection that they're all have been related. They'll go ahead and mention that and bring up an article or a piece on it. However, they'll spin it in such a way that says, look, we can dismiss this and classify it under this. All of these Russian diplomats, we could just classify that under a corrupt Russian state and not address whatsoever the suspicious ties to other nation states and other countries that these people were involved with. So what they like to do is go ahead and address the issue, but spin it in such a way that people don't become more suspicious. Instead, they become dismissive.
Right, and I think a huge factor in that is for most people don't actually have the time to dig into it, because most people are pretty ground down by work and having to like work 9 to 5, take care of kids, all that. Most people just don't have the time to really look into it, so they're digesting it at this like low bit depth, or it's just like, oh, I'm going to get the cliff notes on these stories, and then when you just see the cliff notes, of course you're going to accept it that way.
Exactly, and I think the media banks on that. They say, let us do this work for you. This is our job. You trust us to do our job. We're doing a great bang-up job. Look, we've compiled this list. We've explained the circumstances, and now let's go ahead and, twist it with our little biases so that people won't look deeper into it regardless of the time that they may or may not have. And I think that there are some inquiring minds, many people here, for instance, that will look deeper into it and be suspect of it.
Yeah, and I think another factor in that too is the nature of like how information gets revealed over time. Like, you brought up 9/11 earlier, and I remember the first time I heard anything about 9/11 conspiracy stuff, I saw the first version of Loose Change, and I was like, this is such a ludicrous stretch. There's no way this is true, because it was a pretty flimsy argument at the time. And then 10 years later, like a lot more evidence has come out, and a lot more engineers have done analysis of the buildings and, examined the dust in it. And it's like, wow, now there actually is this huge body of evidence, like saying that, 9/11 needs a deeper look into it. But most people, they heard the 9/11 Commission report, and they're like, oh, the Senate, they had a fair trial, and they decided that there wasn't really anything to look into, so I'm going to accept that. And then that statement, like once that happens, then it's like the book gets closed on it, and people just accept that as the version of truth without like going back to look into it more. So even if there is something that happens, like even if there is something going on with this Trump stuff that's deeper, like if it comes out in 2 years, people don't give a shit anymore,
That's so true. There is a delay. It's a very good point. I like the documentary created about 9/11 called September Clues that came out a long time after Loose Change.
That's a crazy one.
It's great. It focuses specifically on the media's knowledge of those events and how they spun the story and how they essentially deceived the American people at large. It's insane when you consider that. And after that, it becomes very difficult to not, be suspicious of the American mainstream news media outlets, because you can see with watching September Clues that they have a job to deceive, and that is their primary objective. And then when you go back and watch these news stories about that, it becomes very obvious that they're lying through their teeth.
Did you see the owner of the building? Oh, what's his name?
Larry.
Yes. Larry Silverstein, I think.
Larry Flint, Larry Silverstein, one of those.
I believe it's Larry Silverstein. I'll look it up in a second to make sure. But he went, on the record in front of many people, said that he got the plans on his desk for One World Trade Center in 2000. Why would he have plans for a building in the place of two buildings that have no intention of being torn down?
But yeah, I mean, like again, it's like a body of information that builds over time. So like for me, like I saw that September Clues and I was blown away by it, and I was really like, wow, it's so much deeper than I thought it was before. But that's after coming into it with a huge amount of research already done, and like already being suspicious of the official story and suspecting that there was some foul play. So somebody comes in and watches September Clues like straight from like mainstream narrative, they're going to be like, this is silly. So yeah, I mean, it's like a whole body of research that's got to build collectively to get a picture on something.
I mean, with all of that said, right, all this evidence and stuff, if you look at the bigger picture, we ended up in Iraq and Afghanistan as a result from 9/11. And it's hard to come up with the reasoning why that was allowed for by the American people. They sold it to us, right? The media did.
Right, and to what extent are they selling us this anti-government candidate by attacking him?
You mean Trump is an anti-government candidate? Sorry.
Yeah, he was sold to the American people as a drain the swamp. The Republicans hate him. The Democrats hate him. He's the anti-government, anti-corrupt government candidate who's going to go in and do something different because he's not a career, lifelong politician. And so the best way to present a candidate as that is to go ahead and attack him, to have his own party attack him, to have the opposite party attack him, and to have the media attack him, because people are becoming aware of the fact that the media is at foul play. So if the media demonizes a candidate, people are going to be more likely to think that, hey, if the media doesn't like him, then he might not be one of these establishment candidates. That's the best way to sell the American people an establishment candidate.
I mean, I just don't believe that he's an anti-establishment president. I just don't. I feel like he's been, involved with, he's given millions of dollars to Hillary, I thought. Well, that might not be actually. I need to make sure that's true before saying that out loud. But he gave campaign donations to Hillary. He's given, a lot of campaign donations to multiple political candidates. Like, he kind of has political interests.
Right, but those things weren't necessarily addressed with the media. What they did instead was say, to convince this disgruntled American populace, this disenchanted with their government, that he was something different, they attacked him. And that attack, I think, was a ploy to get the American people to think that he was an anti-government candidate, because I think his presidency was planned on way back before the Bushes.
So, I mean, I definitely see that argument softly, but I think, the thing that the hang up for me in that argument is, like if I can see that, it creates this massive division, and obviously the result has been this like huge amount of division, like between the American people, like the people who are buying the mainstream story and hate Trump, and his supporters who think the media is lying to them all the time. But I think also like the end result of that is if they're making this desperate moves to like discredit him and undercut him, and that's like that. It's discrediting themselves. Like the media is discrediting themselves by doing that. And then what's the end goal of that? I mean, it may serve to like create discord in the meantime, which I can see that. But then the result is that there's like a lack of just a dissolution of faith in the media, and for that reason, it's like what would be what's the exit from that? If imagining a scenario where there's people who are pulling the strings in the media and manipulating it to affect the American people, why would they undercut their own ability to guide the discourse?
Because their credibility had already been lost, and they were already aware of that. So it's not necessarily something that's going to be restored.
So I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm just curious. Like, what do you think what's their end game in terms of like if they undercut the media, then what after that? Like after the faith is lost in the media, what's the next thing that they do? Because I mean that seems like just giving up their own power.
Well, the next thing would obviously be for the president himself to then discredit the media. So the American people don't know what up from down is anymore. They don't know what part of it is lies. And then the media itself and these, behind the curtain players can go and create their alternative media sites that once again present a different perspective. And overall, people don't know what to believe. They have no fundamental, true, and absolute point of reference. And that is a confusion and a chaos that is very easy to foment, particularly if you have a plan in place to harness that chaotic notion. They already knew that they were discredited. They were discredited with 9/11 and a number of other things. So suddenly, they were discredited by being Clinton supporters when the whole mass populace fucking hated her. So I don't see how they would suddenly try to, salvage something that was already lost. When you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I feel like a lot of things that are happening right now actually fit into that. Now that you're saying it, because like all these things that are just to create confusion and make people not trust in anything. Like I feel like the whole flat Earth thing is kind of a manifestation of that. It's just like introduce these ideas that people are going to believe, but are just like create so much discord and conversation that's like a distraction.
Right. It's a conspiracy within a conspiracy, so that conspiracy theorists who are kind of on the scent of this deception get pitted against each other because you have these minor wedge issues. So it's always a wedge issue that's going to foment more chaos that they then will harness and take advantage of to, further their agenda or further the storyline, so to speak. So it becomes very difficult for anyone to tell, and what they'll do is they'll put a slight amount of truth, just like the whole Russian, diplomats who are dead. They'll throw in the truth, but they'll spin it in such a way that people don't know what's left or right, what's up and down. And that becomes very precarious for a voter or just a typical American citizen, particularly if they're already disgruntled with their government and already distrustful with the media.
And particularly if there are insanely egregious acts against humanity that have been perpetrated by the government that are so hard to believe that if you believe those things, it's lumped in with all of that other bullshit. And so it just confuses the fuck out of everybody.
That's a great point. And it's a way to soften the blow of those heinous things that the government has done, because when people lose their faith in the media outlet to report factualities about the government, and then they lose faith in their government to protect its citizenry, and they're doing these heinous things, it becomes very easy. It's almost like Stockholm Syndrome, where the people begin to, everyone wants a bit of security. And when we grow up and we're taught in elementary school, we learn about our founding fathers and all these great things they did. But by the time we reach adulthood, we begin to question some of those things. The best way to continue that and further that confusion, which makes for very insecure creatures that are very reactive. And if you're going to harness that reactivity and that emotional displacement that they have, where this security and trust has disappeared, the best way to do that is to foment more confusion and to foment more chaos.
Yeah, and I think, the interesting point about that, going to like what Deepa said in the chat, like the elitists heading these corporations, I think a really important thing to understand is that, people are chaotic, frightened animals at every level, even like going up to these highest spheres. Like these people who if this story of like, the 13 families or whatever, or whoever the richest people in the world are, who are, trying to like instate some sort of agenda, like why would they be doing that? It's because they're desperately afraid that they're going to lose control of their power. I mean, I feel like a lot of like the political movements in the past 100 years, just looking at like the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, like the Bolsheviks took over and bayoneted the Tsar and his whole family and the kids, and I think all the other kings in Europe saw this happening, and they were like, "Oh shit! Like this could happen to us. The people could revolt and like come up against us and like take control." And so I think that that's important to remember. It's like even these people, they're not like some genius masterminds. They've just acquired a certain amount of power and are trying to hold on to it as much as they can. And like personally, I've met people who are like, in those like highest like circles, and they're just normal people. I mean, they may be doing stuff that's like controlling other people, but it's just out of fear and their own limited perspective. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is it's all human beings, like all the way up.
What you brought up earlier is interesting. It's a form of compartmentalization where you can have actual people who have good intentions, and yet they're still playing the agenda of the people who have bad intentions, because it's compartmentalized. Because there's, again, in any secret society or secret agenda, there are some individuals even within that group that have a broader scale and a scalar view, like they're on top of the mountain, and so many of those individuals are at midway up the mountain. So they just, indirectly and without knowledge become pawns of that larger agenda, despite the fact that they are upstanding people or politicians with good intentions.
So, have you guys heard anything about Tulsi Gabbard?
About who? I'm sorry.
Tulsi Gabbard. She is, I mean, if I had to pick the next woman president, just based on sex, whatever, I would pick her. But I honestly think that she's better than anybody else I've been looking at, regardless of her sex.
I personally have lost all faith in the process. And if the media is touting this person and giving her a platform, particularly at a time when women are a little butthurt because we didn't have our first female president because she was such a poor choice, the next thing to do is harness that disgruntled notion and to put up a better-looking candidate who could potentially do it in the future. Not only to keep a pulse on what the American half of the population, which is female, thinks and how they feel and how they're reacting to that, having a misogynist in office. Again, to me, it's just a ploy. I think that if the media actually gets a candidate who is a threat to the establishment, you won't see them on TV. They will be ignored. They may be acknowledged, but will never get a platform to speak and to show their merit, similar to the Ron Paul fiasco.
Right, and I think that she might fall under that category just because she, is not going with the mainstream narrative. She's gone to go talk to President Assad. She's gone to go talk to people in Syria, and she doesn't believe that there are actual moderate rebels. The people in Syria don't even know what the fuck that is. And she created a bill called the Stop Arming Terrorists Act. I'm probably saying that wrong, but she is actually going on the floor and she's putting her foot down and saying, I do not want to indirectly or directly support ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all of these other terrorist organizations, because that's exactly what we're doing. And at the very least, she's doing that. Trump is not, even acknowledging that we do that. So, when people say that he's not a globalist, when people say that he is, anti-establishment, like that's definitely one of the things I look at is, he does not acknowledge that we are directly and indirectly supporting these organizations.
Right. I am always suspicious first and foremost because a candidate like that, or someone that they're parading and giving airtime to me, may potentially be controlled opposition. To really target the people who do think critically about these two spectrums of the ideological hegemony, the far right and the far left, and the extreme. So they're targeting specifically those voters or people who lie somewhere in between and have the ability to critically think, because she is the perfect candidate for someone like that. The fact that they're giving her a platform to speak And the fact that they're parading her through the media to talk about all of the good things that she does makes me suspicious of the media and that she may be a controlled opposition kind of individual.
I can understand why you feel that way, but have you heard of her? I mean, most of the people that I've talked to haven't heard of her, and there's some obscure interviews that you can probably find late at night on, some of the things, because she's really, she was a Bernie supporter, so she kind of like rode the coattails of Bernie a little bit. And this is what's really interesting about this is, she's a plant and she is put there as controlled opposition, like you say, which is very possible, or she's actually trying to do the right thing and helping people, and she's just barely getting some, some leeway in the media, and people are, just barely starting to listen to her because she's so against everything that the media is saying right now. And it's, here we are, like, completely unsure. It's almost like in the Princess and the Bride scene where they're like, you have the poison in your wine because I thought of this, and da-da-da-da. It's like we're all so confused that we don't even know who's trying to help us anymore, and that's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, and I think,
Well, I don't think the media is... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I agree that, like, it's always important to be skeptical and to, take anything that's, like, on the TV as, with a grain of salt and see that it might be a controlled agenda. But I think also, like, looking at the kind of the history of this and the people that have been involved in pushing these agendas that are, like, destroying America and destroying the world, I think it can really go back to, like, feeling, I think, like, a huge part of Bernie's popularity is that people could just feel his integrity. Like, when he gets up and talks, like, you listen to him talk and you're like, this guy is genuine. Like, whether you agree with him or not, you can just see that he's really genuine about what he's saying. And that's really rare. You don't really get that in politics very much. And looking at people like George Bush Sr. and Robert Byrd and, like, Dick Cheney. Like, Dick Cheney looks like the fucking emperor from Star Wars. Like, these people just, like, ooze evil, like, out of their skin, And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. There's this really interesting study where this neuroscientist had some of his patients who had I forget what it's called, like Wernicke's dysplasia or something, or speech dysplasia, where they can't they can hear fine, but they can't understand words. But they can still, like, think fine, except for their language capacity is gone. And he had them watch videos of Ronald Reagan, like, giving a speech, and these people just, like, cracked up, and they thought that Reagan was so hilarious because, like, he's so emotionally devoid, and the people who are his constituents are emotionally devoid, And I think that there's this change happening where people are starting to be able to just, like, look at someone and listen to what they're saying and say, I can feel that you're telling the truth. And I really feel like Tulsi Gabbard gives me that kind of feeling, and that may be a naive thing to go by, but I really think that that's an important thing to look at.
I like the things she says because they're specific, they're very rational. But just even this caption that you have, stop the U.S. government from arming terrorists, with a picture of her face, this comes from the media itself. So I'm not of the impression, and maybe I'm just like a hardcore conspiracy theorist, right? I'm not under the impression that a government that is obviously trying to subject you and to suppress the populace is A, going to give you an education that equips you with the ability to fight against that, or B, going to give you a media that is going to equip you with airtime for a candidate who would specifically fight against that.
But I mean, again, it's like, you can't talk about the government as, like, one person, It's a complicated entity with many, many facets. And I mean, there are things that slip through. I mean, Bernie Sanders is a career politician. He's part of the government. But I don't think he's part of that agenda. And so I think that, like, the cracks do show. It's not like they have total control. It's like certain people have been manipulated through blackmail and all these different techniques, and there's a group of people who are pulling the strings to push an agenda, but they don't have absolute control, and there are people who can emerge and, like, come forward that are not a part of that, and may be able to make a difference. And I think it's important to stay open-minded to that as a possibility, while at the same time, yes, like, being extremely skeptical and being suspicious.
I think that the media, as a arm of the CIA and the NSA itself, as another department of the government, is not going to present us with a viable candidate other than to, again, present someone who is a rational thinker to take where we're at right now as a litmus test and say, okay, this is what they want to hear next. Now we're going to find a candidate who fills that void and fills that vacuum. But I do think that the media is in absolute control. I'm not talking about alternative media or necessarily some of the media that we see online, but the individuals that you see on mainstream news channels are part of that mainstream agenda, whether they know it or not, whether they are truly honest and genuine individuals or not. They're just pawns, in my opinion.
But I mean, a pawn can wake up and go against their instructions, you know?
Well, I think Trump said it best when he came out and said politicians came to me as a businessman for money, and I would give them money, with an understanding that there would be a favor down the road,
Right.
or something of that nature. Don't quote me on that shit. I don't know exactly what he said.
I mean, that's smart in his position. That is smart. It's just that he can't really say that now because he's a politician, and it reflects badly on him, on his record of like the way he thinks.
Well, I think it's just indicative. It's like us looking inside and seeing how the other half lives. It shows us that it's not just him with that kind of mentality. I'm sure of it. How many of these other rich businessmen have been approached in the same manner?
Well, like Softly said, these people, even at the Donald Trump level, are basically just pawns in the game. And they're, giving their cards and, getting their chips, and they're exchanging all of this. And it, like you said, it's a good business move to do that. Why wouldn't you do that if you were a wealthy businessman, tycoon, that could actually benefit from policy changes? Why wouldn't you do that if you were a so-called smart businessman? Like, I don't personally morally support those activities. That's probably why I would never be a tycoon or a person in that position. And that, also, kind of lends to the fact that people that are the most powerful often tend to be the meanest and, step over the little people the most.
I don't see the media, like these massive industries, these complex industrial complexes for whatever selective industry, whether it be pharma, military weapons, production, et cetera, the chemical industry, all of these particular selective industries, they only care about being on the winning side. They will contribute to both campaigns, but they'll contribute slightly more to the campaign that they feel is going to win. And there are some overlays with, if you look at something like Game of Thrones, I know it's ridiculous, but if you look at something like Game of Thrones, you can see where that political dynamic is on display, where individuals will be quick, despite what their constituents want, despite what their people want or care about, to switch sides simply because they must be on the winning side. And that's what these industries do, and that's what very powerful business Mongols do, because their best interest is to serve themselves, and they know that. When it comes to serving themselves, as long as they can do whatever they have to do to maintain their power, that is supreme. It does not matter what anyone else becomes as collateral damage.
Yeah, I mean, that's partly true, but I think also there's like another element at play, which is just like the cultural belief systems. Because like my uncle, for example, he's a Wall Street guy, and like he's a really an example of a person who I believe has like used his money in a very integral way. Like he does a lot of environmental conservation, and he's like bought up land to preserve it and stuff, and he really like believes in like helping the American people and like doing beneficial good causes. And he hosted a Hillary Clinton fundraiser, and like Bill Clinton came to his house, and he got these people he knew to come and give money to her because he truly believed that she was doing the right thing and it would be the best thing for the country for her to be elected president. And that's an example of like, I think the wool got pulled over his eyes, and it gets a little bit tense like having dinner at their house, because I have very different views. But I mean, it's like, I'm not going to go in and be like, hey, you're totally wrong and like you're manipulated and you're part of this system, because I can see, I've known him since I was a little kid, like he's a really good person. and he simply doesn't know. And you can't just like go to somebody like that and be like, hey, you're totally wrong about everything you believe about politics, because they're under like a strong dose of digesting this mainstream narratives all the time, And so yeah, I mean, I just like to stand by the argument that it's not so black and white, and there's a lot of pieces at play.
It might not be black and white. There is a lot of moving parts to it, but there's definitely, I guess, a cultural thing, right? Some sort of cultural thing that where these people that are put in these powerful positions with the big, deep pockets can control our political system. We've learned how to do this. This is how I think our political system came to be.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think something that is going to happen, among many things for this stuff to change is really for like the elites to have a change of heart. Like these people with a lot of money have to be shifted in their culture. They've got to be shifted in their perceptions to realize that accruing power and holding on to it is not, the best thing for life and for their own existence as well, Because, I mean, the result of it is like the whole planet's being destroyed. And these people who are in positions of power, like allowing the planet to be destroyed, it's like they're poisoning their own air too, And I think that, I don't know, I see signs that that's changing and the culture of it is changing. Because like it seems like people who have new money like are tending to like approach it a little bit differently. Like, you see people like Elon Musk. I'm not saying he's a saint or anything, but like he's used his wealth from PayPal to, make an electric car company, make a solar panel company, and like take steps to actually like change things in a positive way. I think there's glimmers of hope in that sense, even though there is still like this situation that we've been talking about.
Well, it's like, the old saying, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That kind of notion that, these people change when they get up there into those high wealth society type systems, right? They don't associate. You're not going to be like a billionaire hanging out in your fucking neighborhood that you grew up in, You're just not going to be able to relate to anybody in that area, and so you get up into these social circles that relate to all these elitists, and your priorities change over time.
Well, that's
where that saying goes. Like, I'm sorry, Natty. They say that absolute power corrupts absolutely.
I mean, but these people are also members of the Sixth Society, and everything, has a cause and effect relationship. Even though they would like to think that they are separate from us, they are connected to us, and they breathe the same air, and they drink the same water, and they get cancer, and they struggle too. So they are going to be forced to make decisions based on their environment, just like everyone else. And we live in a sick environment. So it's just, we're digging ourselves deeper and deeper into this hole. But I also think that there are people on the outer edges of that hole that are figuring out how to bring more people out of that place,
Well, I think the power and the money itself and the privilege of persuasion and leverage that they achieve as they move up the social ladder engenders the notion that they are not the same as us, that they're better than us because they're doing better than us. And it's only a matter of time before, their wealth and privilege inoculates them from the rest of society. And then they look on the masses as something that they can use to prop up their power, to prop up their status quo so they can maintain that power structure. And in that is the way that power corrupts people, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think a really important thing to recognize too is that, I think it's really good to view it as it's like, it's these sick people who are part of a sick society. And I think that it's like there's this situation that's emerged where so there's like a massive inequality of power. But I mean, that inequality of power is not because some humans are more powerful than others. It's because of a collective belief in a system that creates that. It's like we believe in the power of the dollar and the power of our economic system and the power of our government that creates this inequality, this huge gaps between people, And I think that is it's something that's like all of our collective responsibility to heal, And it's like we can put it on these people and say oh, these people are controlling everyone. These people are, pulling all the strings and controlling money and accruing more power for themselves. But they're only able to do that because of a collective belief that us as individuals don't have power to do something about it, So I think that, the answer to this is not to say like, oh, we gotta, it's just like fucked because these people are controlling everything, or like we just have to wait for them. It's like we have each person, each individual has to take the steps in their own life to say like, okay, how do I increase my own power and influence the people around me to make things better,
Right.
I think that's very well put, and I couldn't agree more. And I don't think that power is inherent in any one place or position or person or conglomerate of person. I also believe that power truly lies in where the belief of power lies. So that inasmuch as people believe that the system is all-powerful, it becomes so. It's a self-manifest, sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And I also agree that every individual, as powerless as they might feel, must do whatever they can in their own individual lives to be part of that solution. And I try to remind myself and other people, if I can, that the only reason to necessitate such corruption, machinations, and manipulation to uphold that power structure is because they know it's a house of cards. They know that it's a false illusion. And if they would not need to do all of these things to protect it, if they were not scared of people. So the power really lies in the populace. The reason that they manipulate the populace is because they know that the power lies in the populace. It's just that the populace, as a collective belief, believes that that power is inherent in these groups and does not believe, especially as individuals, that they have any power. And the opposite is true.
I kind of like to see us as all little water droplets. And, we're going to make a tidal wave eventually. That if each one of us takes a small step forward, we can all make a big change. And I think that truth always wins. Personally, like if you fight manipulation and machinations and all these, atrocities with truth and with love, like I truly believe, like if enough people do that, you can make a big enough difference to start the chain reaction that's necessary to then organize into a better type of society.
Yeah, I think Yuko, made a good point. It's like, yeah, these CEOs do have sociopathic tendencies, and I think something about it's an interesting, like in the nature of like someone who has a dysfunction of any kind. It's like there's an urge to like want other people to like have the same dysfunction as you. So these people who are sociopathic, and they don't believe that there's such a thing as a human spirit. They believe that human beings are mechanistic animals that are to be controlled, and they want everyone else to believe that also because it validates the perpetuation of their own power. But I think it's like it's on a very simple level. It's like if we were to go and get everybody on our street to agree to pool all of our resources together, like buy all the property, grow food, create solar panels, create independent power systems. It's like there's no need for like dependence on any kind of system to provide that for us. But it's like we're so locked into like, okay, wait, I gotta make my paycheck and like get my rent for the month. There's no time for that, So it's very much illusory.
I mean, that's the biggest conspiracy of all to me, is that we are stuck in this cycle of going to school, getting indoctrinated, going to another more expensive school and having to work, maybe 2 jobs to get to that school. Then you get that piece of paper, then you have to find another job in another box to, basically get instructions from your boss. And you have no time to raise your kids. You have no time to form lasting, loving relationships. You have no time to use your brain for anything else creative or productive after you've done this, meaningless work that has nothing to do with your life dreams or goals.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to something I've been thinking about a lot, which is, just this deep human need to be validated. It's like, it's like our most basic need. Like, a human baby is like the most vulnerable animal on the planet, and like if as a baby, if you don't get accepted by your parents, you die. So it's like this very, very base, like biological burned in need to be accepted by other human beings. And when we grow up in a world where it's like being accepted is dependent on, fulfilling certain social expectations of like having a job, buying a house, these basic things, being successful in some kind of way, it's like that distracts from the real truth of the situation, which is like a lot of the stuff we have we don't need. If people can or get to a point where we can turn away from that and say like, hey, I'm just inherently validated, I feel validated in myself just unconditionally, then it's like what comes after that? Oh, then the only thing left is just to like be of service or help people or do something that's beneficial.
If you have the fortunate ability to be able to do so in your current situation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And further goes to the notion that we should look at ourselves as creatures in an environment. We really are still creatures. We're still animals. And we're going to adapt and react to our environment. But, one of the things that's meant to separate us from the typical animal kingdom is our ability to discern that we are creatures and to discern that we are being reactive. But I think that there's so much at play to manipulate people's, not only those fundamental things you speak of, the need to be validated, the need to feel a part of something bigger than yourself. Those are things that have been used against us since the advent of the advertising industry and the research that was done in psychology to see how particular points of advertising and so forth would affect us as creatures. But we need to do our own research in that regard, and we're so constantly emotionally manipulated by these emotional issues, transgender bathrooms, abortion, for instance, race, for instance. We become emotionally attached to these identities, and then we seek validation from others who feel the same, and we fight and compete with those who feel opposite of that. And those are some of the wedge issues that are being used against us to exploit those divisions. But the ability to stand outside yourself and to say, why am I having an emotional reaction to this, has become very rare. And we're manipulated in music, we're manipulated in, So we're manipulated by movies, we're manipulated by our feelings constantly. We're barraged with manipulation regarding our feelings and how we feel about ourselves through commercials and print advertising and you name it. And I think that we've become a populace that very much identifies through those animal tendencies without even being aware of it.
Yeah, that's really true, and I think there's this idea that Terence McKenna talked about a lot. Is the archaic revival. And I think there is a movement happening of people trying to reconnect with like this authentic feeling experience, and acknowledge, like not say like, oh, we're manipulated by our emotions, therefore I just shouldn't feel anything, but to go the opposite way and say, how can I like become more in my body? How can I feel more and be more in tune with my natural feelings? And I think, we see the glimmers of this in like, people trying to search back for these like indigenous ways of existing, and like tattooing and, connecting to the body through like using psychedelic plants and through, doing various like physical trials and stuff like that. Like I feel like, even sports is like, is an attempt to have some sort of like initiation ritual, and it's like there's these things that can like activate our body consciousness that have been turned off for a long time. But I think the thing that gives me hope is that there's clearly like movements of people trying to reawaken that.
Yeah, I think that the hope that we may or may not have and is the substance of the things we wish for, and that the solution to the problem is not going to be from the top down, but it's going to be from the bottom up. And I hope to be able to take personal responsibility for that self-same notion and plan to, set in place and take action. It's a call to action for your desire to see change happen.
Okay, well, I think that was a nice first little podcast. Thank you guys for providing your input.
Yeah, I want to just say one more thing to kind of top that off, which is that, even this, like to bring it to like this meta level, it's like even this is, it's like, okay, like moving away from like the whole agenda of this, everything we've been talking about. It's like all this careful like plotting and planning to like make something happen in order to take control of it. Whereas really, we have this kind of innate ability to intuitively go towards something that's going to benefit us. And even this, it's just like having an open-ended conversation and sharing it. It's like that's a step in that direction of like, start this interconnectivity between people in order to make some sort of change, but without specifically planning what it's going to be. So, yeah, fucking awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely an organic process, but it's good and encouraging. And I think the more it can be shared with other people, it will also encourage them to know that they are the difference that makes the difference.